Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pierce. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 6th of May 2024. This is a military aid and equipment video that I am hoping to rattle through because I spent far too long talking in my first video of the day. So I'm going to start with the Italian Defence Minister ruling out sending troops to Ukraine, saying the discussion, quote, increases tensions. It's a de-escalation approach to not having troops act in Ukraine at all. Rather than take on the Macron approach, which is strategic ambiguity, and say that we might have troops, and not telling you how they might be used, but we're not going to rule them out, which I think is a much more sensible approach, rather than the Italians here going, we're definitely not going to have them, which is setting your own red lines, and of course Putin's going to love that. And that's coming from the Defence Minister Guido Crosetto. In fact, if we see what No Report says, the actual quote is, our position does not change. We have always said that Ukraine needs to be helped in every possible way, although not in every possible way, apart from one. And we are doing this, but we have also always ruled out direct intervention of our military in the conflict. So that's that, and that's from them. Ukraine gets their first weapons from the latest US aid just 4 days after Biden's signing. I said that yesterday from the New York Times. With US Congress stalling military aid for 6 months, Ukraine's defense is weakened, leading to gradual losses in Russian forces in Ukrainian Donetsk Oblast. And in light of that bill that went through, that's my segue into this. So there was an interview on 60 Minutes last night in the US of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, who I've been impressed with Hakeem Jeffries. His rhetoric on Ukraine has been just completely on point. He said a months-long delay in aid to Ukraine was a result of the growing pro-Russian Vladimir Putin faction in the Republican Party. And he said that in that 60 Minutes interview. So we'll pop into that a little bit in the geopolitics segment later, but just to give you what the Kyiv Independent says, because it's pertaining to that military aid package. US assistance for Ukraine had been blocked in the US Congress since October the 23rd October 2023 until April, when House Speaker Mike Johnson called a vote on a foreign aid package of $61 billion to Ukraine. The Ukraine aid bill was promptly approved by both chambers, signed by Biden, and is restoring the flow of American military assistance. But Jeffrey singled out Republican Congresswoman and conspiracy theorist Marjorie Taylor Greene, who he characterized as leading the faction. So this is the growing pro-Putin faction in the Republican Party. Green has led the effort to oust Johnson over his decision to hold a vote on the Ukraine aid, and has also repeatedly disparaged Ukrainian leaders and spread widely debunked conspiracy theories about the country. The minority leader added that his views are largely shared by top Republicans in Congress, who have also recently expressed concern about the growing influence of Russian propaganda within the party. The obstruction of the faction has not just hurt Ukraine's defensive efforts, said Jeffries, but also undermined US national security. I completely agree. Russia's previous history of aggression towards Ukraine and Georgia illustrates that allowing Putin to win the current full-scale war would encourage future military adventurism, he added. Quote, we can't let Ukraine fail, because if it does, then there's a significant likelihood that America will have to get into the conflict, not simply with our money, but with our servicewomen and our servicemen. Jeffries also disputed the notion that US support for Ukraine has been an unsuccessful endeavor, which has been regularly argued by Republican opponents of aid. Beyond the fact that Ukraine has been able to hold off Russian forces for more than 2 years, Jeffries said that, quote, at least half of the Russian military that existed in February of 2022 is gone. So that's good rhetoric from Jeffries. A Minister for Strategic Industries of Ukraine, Alexander Kamyshin, top-knot man, said that both Denmark and Canada have agreed to finance the production of weapons such as armored vehicles and drones by the Ukrainian defense industry. I reported this from, I think it was Denmark the other day. This is an interesting move because I often talk about how very often aid to Ukraine comes in the form of people stimulating their own military-industrial complex in order to give military aid from that country to Ukraine. France is very big on doing that from inside the EU. So it might not just be to the benefit of French munitions or equipment manufacturers, but the EU as a whole. So that money is not kind of, scare quotes, wasted, or it doesn't go out of the EU to benefit some other country. It stays in the EU so that you are helping Ukraine, but also helping yourselves. So it's very interesting that Canada and Denmark have then gone, right, we need to help Ukraine by putting money into Ukraine. So this is actually And I assume this is money just going without any strings attached, but there could be strings attached in ways that I don't understand. But instead of giving just a bunch of money to Ukraine, it's investing in the Ukrainian defense industry, which is great. So if you're happy with not spending on your own economy to stimulate your own economy, then the next best thing is to do this, because otherwise it's like, right, I'm going to use Canadian dollars or Danish, I don't know, krona, or whether they use a euro. We use Danish money to spend on, I don't know, American or British manufacturing to get their equipment to Ukraine. Actually, it's better if Ukraine can make comparable equipment, then it's better to give that money to Ukraine, because it keeps the Ukrainian economy going. So if you can't support your own economy, then support Ukraine's economy. So I think there is some significance to this. Anyway, they're agreeing to finance the production of weapons such as armored vehicles and drones by the Ukrainian defense industry. You might have Rochelle, who make the Senator APC in Canada, going, hang on, we can make loads more stuff, but there might be certain things that the Canadians can't make. Certain drones that they can't make. We know that Canada, for example, has given loads in terms of drones, or is due to give loads in terms of drones and armored vehicles to Ukraine. So it's interesting that that money is going to Ukraine manufacturing of that same equipment. But hopefully you get my point there. Right. This year, Rheinmetall will hand over prototypes of 155mm artillery shells with a range of 100 kilometers to Ukraine, according to the CEO of Rheinmetall. It was stated that it was also stated that this year Ukraine will receive from Rheinmetall a six-figure amount of conventional artillery shells. In other words, if you're saying that the EU wanted to give 1 million shells by the end of March or whatever, now we have in 1 year, one company itself, just one company, Rheinmetall, will give a six-figure amount of conventional artillery shells. Now, that could be just 100,000, but it could be 999,000. So I'd like to know exactly what that number would be. Right, German aid to Ukraine gives a bit more meat to the bone here. In addition to six-digit number of regular artillery shells that Ukraine will receive from Rheinmetall this year, Rheinmetall will also supply prototypes of artillery shells with a range of up to 100 kilometers. A very interesting detail which the CEO of Rheinmetall publicly recently disclosed: the most modern 155mm artillery ammunition that Ukraine has or had to use to date also came to Ukraine via German aid, but not from Rheinmetall. These were Volcano ammunition, that's what's being fired here, in various versions. For example, Volcano 155 BER with a 50-kilometer range, as you can see in the video, and a Volcano 155 GPS SAL with a 70-kilometer range were delivered. A total of 255 shells were delivered of those types. So that's really good news. Thank you, Rheinmetall. Finland is considering building a TNT factory, that's for explosives, in response to the war in Ukraine. The move comes amid the critical shortage of explosives. So there's a bottleneck, it appears, in making shells amid Russia's war in Ukraine. Finnish media outlet Ye reported, citing the country's defense minister, Antti Hakkanen. Now, it is, I think, 2 years away. The building of that plant would take 2 years to get up and running. As according to one source I read. So that's not immediate, but it does show you this general movement towards a kind of military economy within the EU. Footage of the F-16 fighter jets bearing the insignia of the Ukrainian Air Force was shown in a video greeting by Air Force Commander Mykola Oleschuk on the 20th anniversary of the Kharkiv National University of the Air Force. So this is quite exciting because it means it's getting closer and closer to Ukrainian F-16s operating in Ukraine. There's a 2-minute 11 video here, and you can see that there are lots of things that the Ukrainian Air Force is involved in. Bit of a PR video, but within that there's also F-16s with Ukrainian insignia on. There you go. Lots to look at in that video. We'll move on now. And Ukrainian soldiers are being trained on Panzerhaubitze 2000 still. So there's footage coming out of Ukrainians in that capacity, and that's good news because we kind of forget that there's continual training going on for all sorts of pieces of equipment, which would suggest that there are going to be continual provisions of said equipment, in this case Panzerhaubitze 2000, for them to be continually trained on that. Right, going on to sort of mobilization in this case, and I did a video on this the other day, please go and check that out. It's to do with refugee status for Ukrainians of fighting age who have kind of escaped from Ukraine to avoid mobilization, whether they are entitled to refugee status based on merely wanting to be safer, as opposed to being a proper conscientious objector, which is objecting to the war as a whole and then having rationale for that. If you're just like, I don't object to the war, I think Ukraine should be defending itself, but I don't want to be called out myself because I want my family to be provided for, I don't want to die type thing, so I'm going to go away to another country. Does that entitle you to be a refugee? And I would argue it doesn't, and I did that in the other video, but that's not to make any judgment on those people. Now, Hungary, unsurprisingly, will not allow Ukrainian male refugees to be sent to their deaths, the country's deputy PM has said. Now, I don't know whether this is Ukrainian war getting wrong the refugee... Well, sorry... It could be to conflate refugees with people who have just escaped. So the idea is that they might not qualify as refugees, but both the deputy PM and the Ukrainian Review here is saying that these are refugees. On the other hand, if Hungary are essentially against Ukraine prevailing in a war, they are more likely to grant refugee status to Ukrainian men, because it means that those men won't have any justification for being sent back to Ukraine, right? So there's lots going on here. Anyway, the quote is, Hungary will not extradite refugees to Ukraine. We are not investigating whether the person is liable for military service or not. Based on basic humanity, we will not allow them to be sent to their deaths. In other words, it looks like Hungary would just grant them refugee status, whether they are entitled to that under things like UNHCR or not. So, because that works for Hungary, not only do they get, I guess, they're at a time where they're the worst performing economy in the EU. They might need working age men to help out there. I don't know what the context is for that, but I think that they would, to help Russia out, want to keep Ukrainian fighting age men from returning to Ukraine. Russia is preparing for and that's not me making any comment about the moral evaluation of those men themselves and whether they are entitled to refugee status. Yeah, it has to be done on a case-by-case basis, but I think Hungary are probably being quite difficult there. Russia is preparing the first mobilization in the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region. Ivan Fedorov, the head of the Zaporizhia RMA, announced this. So on the one hand, you can argue about whether it is right for Ukrainians to be kind of sent back to Ukraine to fight. On the other hand, we have Russia rounding up Ukrainians to fight for the Russians in a kind of forced mobilization. So apparently Russia is preparing the first mobilization in the occupied part of Zaporizhia. Ivan Fedorov, the head of Zaporizhia Regional Military Administration, announced, quote, today, they have created the entire infrastructure that deals with conscription. Military desks have been created at every enterprise where military records of residents or who remain in temporary occupation are kept. Russia needs troops. And we're better placed to get them than the people that you've taken over. This is pretty normal. It's happened throughout history. It's not to say it's cool. It's deeply uncool that this happens. But it's not surprising that Russians would be doing this. Okay. Here we have, I love this, Timothy Snyder recognizing Surrey stands with the Ukraine. And those, I don't know whether Surrey stands with the Ukraine were part of the big convoy of British fire engines that went out to Ukraine. But anyway, this is Timothy Snyder says, we can all do something. Amazing work by Surrey Stands with Ukraine. And they're hoping that a fire engine from Ashley here in Surrey, I believe, is found a new home in Ukraine. And they've driven it out there. And that's brilliant stuff. Awesome to see that kind of support for Ukraine. Here we have Ukrainians experimenting supposedly with the use of FPV kamikaze drones to intercept Russian reconnaissance drones. The first attempts failed because the drones could not overcome the Orlan's prop wash. The next attempts may include the addition of a fragmentation warhead that can be remotely detonated, possibly in front of the drone. So these drones struggle to get close because of, I presume, all the turbulence created from the propeller of the Orlan, and obviously these smaller drones don't have the kind of power, even though they can keep up with the Orlan. There might be quadcopters with propellers up, going sort of horizontally and not vertically, and that could mean that they're more affected by the turbulence created by the sort of vertical propeller of the Orlan. I don't know what I'm talking about really, but a lot of air defense missiles work as fragmentation, so they explode in front of the incoming missile, and those fragments then destroy the missile or cause it to go awry, and that could be how they are going to develop these kind of drone-on-drone drones. And then, on the other hand, we have Samuel Bender reporting on China's Zhejiang Intelligence Equipment developing drones. They've opened an office in Russia. So this is how China is helping Russia. They will assemble agricultural drones because, of course, there's a really... I mean, yes, drones are useful in agriculture, but I'm not sure it's so useful that you would open a drone manufacturing plant in Russia during wartime to deal with to create octocopters that could be used in war. So these, scare quotes, agricultural drones in Krasnodar will produce around 20 drones per month. I mean, how many drones are the Russian agricultural enterprises getting through? For the record, such agricultural drones are favourites in the war as heavy bombers. Oh, who knew? Yeah, this is a real problem, and this is one of those loopholes, if it is indeed a loophole or an outright sanction breaker, that the Chinese are just really helping the Russians with. Something needs to be done about this. Now, China and Russia will know that the Baba Yaga drones of the Ukrainians are having an incredible impact on the front, and they are being used really effectively. The Russians will want to be going toe-to-toe with the Ukrainians in that respect. And then finally, Russia has likely been recruiting, this is a quote, recruiting Cuban nationals to fight in its army in Ukraine. Research by the BBC has shown in September and October 2023, passport details belonging to over 200 Cubans who allegedly joined the Russian army were leaked online. So just to remind you that they are still getting Nepalese, Cubans, Cape Verde Islands, all sorts of people from a number of places are finding their way to Russia to fight for the Russians. And at least 200 Cubans are supposedly being there. Reminder of that from BBC. Right. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate your support. Take care, guys. I'll speak to you soon.